Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is January 7th at 10:05 on Tuesday morning. It is Tuesday. No, it's Wednesday. It's a Wednesday morning. It's so easy to lose track. The reason I probably lost track is today we have had a snow day, which was unexpected. I guess it snowed and it kind of was icy. There were icy conditions this morning, so they canceled school. So I have today off. So I'm just chilling like a villain, as the kids say, which is kind of weird, but fine, I guess, because I still get paid for the day, which is nice. But um, we just had a big, huge vacation for Christmas break. So yeah, that was unexpected. I remember at work I work at the Montessori school in Belfast, and like the last part of the day, a couple of the teachers were leaving, and I heard them say, "Oh, we'll see how the weather is for tomorrow," which and meaning tomorrow, which is today. And they were like, "Well, we'll check how the weather is." And I was like, What's that about?" And they said, "Yeah, it might be really bad in the morning, a lot of snow and ice, and it might rain and freeze or something." And I was like, "Huh, I didn't hear about that." And then that was that. And then I got this morning, and it was pretty snowy when I first got up this morning. And I looked at my email, and I was like, "Oh, school is over. School is canceled. So here we are." So I can take my leisurely time. Not that I'm in a rush anyway to do things or what have you. But the roads seem like they're fine now. So this is like the second snow day, I think, first this year of 2026, and we had one snow day last year, 2025. So two snow days down. Anyway, um, I love. I did a big show about a little less than a month ago on winter movies. I love that seasonal vibe for certain films, and especially when it comes to movies that are set in the wintertime. Like that's probably like as far as films that are set in a particular season. That's my all-time favorite. I love movies also that are kind of set in wilderness locations, like films that are set in like deep woods. I really, two movies I can think of that are just perfect examples of that is Robert Eggers' The Witch. Amazing film, his first movie. That's all set in this kind of deep, creepy forest. It's perfection. And then winter movies, the iconic Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Like that, to me, both those movies are like the epitome of that. And lately, I've been doing. This is going to be my second show. I'm going to be talking about film score and film scores and soundtracks because I've done. I did a show on some film scores, like separate individual shows. I think I did a show a year or two ago on the Blade Runner soundtrack, and I've done a handful of other like just straight up coverage of specific soundtracks and films. And then I've also done. I know I did a bigger show a couple of years ago where I just talked about film scores and soundtracks and all of those things, and how that is a good film score, a good really talented composer can really raise that experience, that experience of like pure escapism within the world of cinema, whether you're watching a movie at home or at the theater. It's such a powerful and rich experience. And there's been some movies as of late and within the last couple of years, and especially this year, where there's been some really incredible soundtracks. And so I'm gonna be doing. I think I might be doing a few more shows on just straight up like soundtracks for movies because for me it's such an influence and such an inspiration for me personally. But then when it comes to the music that I write for Quantum, massive. Movies are the biggest influence for the band, and starting with kind of the soundtrack vibe of that particular film, and then just really everything else that entails. And I'm just, really, really excited, and it gets me really, really excited. A few years ago, when I was buying Blu-rays, when I started getting really into Blu-rays and buying a lot of the movies I was buying they would come, with the movie itself, but then also with the soundtrack. So I acquired some really killer soundtracks, and then as of the last year or two, in my purchases of buying Blu-rays, I haven't come across nowhere near as many soundtracks that are included in Blu-rays, which is kind of disappointing. But I've gotten some really good ones. I think it's because maybe certain boutique labels that put out movies are not really, maybe it's not worth it financially, but I'm not sure why. But that was a big thing where I have acquired quite a few soundtracks, but as of late, newer Blu-rays, especially with Blu-rays, or boutique labels, haven't really come across. I haven't gotten any soundtrack stuff, with the additional CD, because I do, even obviously with film and movies, I'm a physical media guy. Blu-rays, and then I still do buy DVDs, but mainly Blu-rays. And then when it comes to music, I mainly listen to CDs. That's my main thing. So a lot of these soundtracks came in CD form, which is really awesome. I have, I don't know how many thousands of CDs, and I actually have a really good cassette player, so I do listen to cassettes, but I still mainly listen to CDs. I use CDs a lot in my car when I'm driving, and then in my practice space, I have a little stereo and boombox in there, so I use CDs in there all the time. And when I'm home, like, I really love Bandcamp a lot. I use Bandcamp quite a bit. I got this really beautiful, really, it's kind of one of the best investments I've ever made. I got this really awesome Bluetooth speaker for like $70, and I'm pretty sure they make really like big ones, but this is a nice, pretty tiny, and it's really, really awesome. I mean, it charges, you can plug it into the wall, and it stays charged for a long time. The sound quality of this thing is insane, and I was pretty late to the game when it comes to uh, Bluetooth. It's the first time I've ever used that technology, and it's amazing. Like, I use Bandcamp a lot just because I feel like their business practices are the best. The way they treat musicians and artists, and their sound quality. All Most other streaming platforms just kind of compress everything, so the sound I always find is not very good. But on Bandcamp, it's really good, and so I still prefer CDs though. I really think if you get the best way to listen to music, I think is if you have a really good high quality CD. Those versions of certain albums is usually really, really good, like really, really good. But probably the best way to, as far as quality, is like newer kind of reissued, higher end, the thicker kind of vinyl. I forget what it's called, but it's a vinyl, and it's a thicker brand, like and those records. I think listening to music on vinyl, on a really great record, especially one of the newer ones, like, because they reissue music all the time, classic albums. That's probably, if you have a nice sound system, that's probably the ultimate way to listen to music. But CDs are really, really good, I think, if you get a good quality CD. But I don't know. I feel like most people, and I hate to always generalize, or to generalize to a certain degree, but I feel like a lot of people don't really care about sound quality, because I am amazed and kind of shocked by how a lot of people do listen to music. Like, they'll listen to music on their phone through the speaker of their phone, and the sound is shit. And then a lot of people will be happy with like watching a movie on their laptop or whatnot through headphones, or even just playing music through their laptop without a speaker, and it will just come through the audio. It sounds really bad. And then people watch things on their phone, watch TV shows on their phone. A lot of people too have TVs, obviously with streaming, but they just have the system, the system, the volume that's coming out of the actual TV. So it's like that's not everybody, but I think most people don't really care and think about the quality or definition of sound. And for me, I think I'm fairly laid back about most things, but when it comes to sound, I'm a pretty big stickler. I'm a really big stickler in quality. And I think when it comes to bands putting out music, I think if you can get a really good vinyl pressing, that's amazing. Getting vinyl done, pressing vinyl, is very expensive, but the sound is incredible. And then if you can get a really good sounding like quality CD, that's really great. A lot of bands now do cassettes, and it's similar to the whole VHS craze because I think it's totally like the sound quality can be really good. I think at times on cassette, but cassettes get eaten all the time. They don't last very long. I mean, CDs don't last forever either, but I think they have a longer they have more durability, and I think cassettes get eaten, and a lot of the times the quality is not very good. And I think it's kind of this weird trend I think that happened a few years back where with cassettes and VHS, like, and it's purely based out of like this hipster kind of thing of like, oh, it's cool. Like, you got the only way you can watch a cool 80s movie is like on cassette because that's like, that brings you back to that time, and that's the aesthetic, and that's how you should watch it. Or the same thing with cassettes. And when you actually look at the quality, the sound quality, and the visual quality when you watch a VHS tape, it's actually awful. And I remember one thing that really changed for me is seeing a really great interview with Bill Luswig, who is the CEO of Blue Underground, which is one of the best boutique labels out there. And all the work that he does and that company does is amazing. Like, they basically take all of these really, obscure exploitation movies and re-release them on 4K or Blu-ray. And a lot of the times they'll get the original negative or the actual film from the movie and transfer it to 4K or Blu-ray. And he was talking in this one interview, and he's also one of my favorite directors. I mean, he made the Maniac Cop movies, Vigilante, and my favorite slasher movie of all time, Maniac. I mean, Bill Luswig's the man, or William Luswig. And he was talking about addressing that whole thing, about the whole like trend with VHS, and like VHS now is worth a lot of money. Unopened VHS tapes are worth quite a bit of money, and a lot of people buy them, sell them. And cassettes have become really popular. And he was addressing that whole thing, and he kind of just felt it was, well, really utterly ridiculous. And he said it wasn't really. It's just like this whole like kind of cool thing that the kids are doing these days. When it comes down to like the quality, he says like if you take a movie like Maniac, for instance, his masterpiece, and you got to see that in the theater in the '80s when it came out, the quality was like stunningly beautiful. It was like he was saying it was equivalent to like what you would see in a like a 4K version of it or a really high end Blu-ray version of it. He's like that's what the cinematic experience was like when you got to see it in the theater. And their commitment to those movies is to like have that experience. And he said it's nothing, the whole VHS thing and the quality of it is just kind of, well, dog shit in comparison. So he doesn't understand it, because you're not getting good quality. You're not getting good visual and especially audio quality. So very interesting, and that really made me think differently because he's the man and he's in the thick of it all, So he's doing it. He's using all this new technology to re-release all of these classic, underground films. So he's the man, and he's legitimately an authority figure in that world. So, you know. Anyway, so yesterday's topic, I just uploaded a video for the soundtrack and film score for this glorious masterpiece here, The Substance. It was composed by a UK electronic artist under the name of Raffi, who I didn't know anything about him at all. Looked into his career, and very very cool. I just uploaded a video just talking about him as an artist and the amazing work that he did for The Substance. Incredible. So I've been on this soundtrack kick, and then today's show is going to be on this crazy movie that I just got, based on one of my all-time favorite books, and that is Whitley Strieber's Communion, starring Christopher Walken. This movie has an absolutely incredible soundtrack, so I'm going to be doing a show today on the soundtrack. The coolest thing, and I just uploaded the video for The Substance, and again, it was my second time seeing this movie. Watched it the other night. I got a chance to see it in the theater, and I was just totally blown away by it. Totally blown away by it. And then I watched it again on Blu-ray, and again, I've had that experience lately where handful of movies that I saw in the theater that I was just totally floored with, and just fell in love with them. I found myself, and I bought or actually got some of these movies from Santa Claus, and I watched them for the first time on Blu-ray at home, and I have to say, like, the experience was even more emotional and even more engaging and intense. That happened with me with The Long Walk. Like, I got to see this in the theater, and it was incredible, but seeing it at home was even more powerful and more riveting. It just hit me even harder, and it hit me hard in the theater. And then the same thing with The Substance. So, it's very cool. And so the thing is too, that was kind of a cool thing that happened after watching The Substance. Like, again, with music, film score stuff, it's such an integral part for films, and it's one of the most powerful aspects, I think, of filmmaking, because it sets a tone, it sets a mood, it brings you into a world. And I uploaded a video this morning on Raffi, the composer for Substance, so check that out. And again, I want to thank the beautiful folks that are always commenting on these videos and always want to welcome aboard the new subscribers that we're getting almost every week. So it's very very cool. Always there's always plenty of things to talk about and movies to cover and whatnot. So, but I just uploaded a video on the soundtrack and the soundtrack for The Substance by composer Raffi, the British UK electronic artist. Who, again, that's one of the cool things too, is when I take a deeper dive in doing these shows or just movies that I'm watching for the first time, or movies I've never seen before, or movies that I have seen before, I can, discover these other things that are going on that make this movie so great, like the soundtrack and discovering this artist Raffi, who I've never knew who he was. So there's all those kinds of things that like opens up all these other kind of doors. It's really cool. And when it comes to composing music too, I always love film scores because I brought it up in the video, but I think it's an important thing to talk about. But a lot of the times, a lot of the times when it comes to soundtrack stuff or film scores, the music can play all the right roles like in that setting of the film and be, incredibly powerful and really do its job. But sometimes the soundtrack, like if you get, and it's happened to me before, but like if you get the soundtrack, like a lot of the times when a movie comes out, a lot of the film scores or soundtracks will also be available to buy, basically, on CD or cassette or vinyl. And that's become a bigger trend, which I think is a cool trend. A lot of people have been buying like vinyl soundtracks, which is really really awesome. So, but a lot of the times, or I don't know if I should say a lot of the times, but there it does happen, and it sometimes is a weird, a weird place or a weird thing for it to fall into. But if you buy a soundtrack or listen to a soundtrack, just that, sometimes it's not as interesting or it's not as powerful. But in the context of watching it with the movie, it is powerful because that's happened before. Um, where out of the context of the film itself, the soundtrack by itself is not very good. I think most of the time, though, it's the other way. I think most soundtracks, over the years that I've bought or that I've listened to a lot, I'd say the majority of them are still like really powerful and really evocative and makes for an enjoyable listen. And again, that style of music is such a massive influence on me. It really is. It really, really is. And so it was cool when I watched The Substance. It really inspired me. The music, especially, it was so powerful watching it at home. And I wrote. I think it was the next day. I came up with this little melody of just kind of dicking around in my studio working on a melody, and then I came up with this tune, and I ended up writing this kind of whole song that was about a little almost 4 minutes, kind of a shorter song, but it all kind of came out at once. So I came up with the changes, I came up with the melody, I came up with like the structure of it, um, came up with the lyrics, came up with some of the vocal ideas and the percussion ideas, and it happened within, I don't know, 40 minutes or so that I had the whole thing kind of done, and I'm like, what the fuck, that never happens. So I I remember kind of messing around with a couple of sounds on my keyboard. I try to always, if I'm jamming or trying to write some music or I get an idea, I try to like always focus for at least a starting point, which I think is pretty important. I think it's the most important aspect of songwriting is the melody. Like if something stands out and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool, or perks my ears up or grabs my attention, that's usually the starting point. And usually, if that happens, then I'll focus on that. So that happened the other night after watching The Substance because I was so inspired by it. Came up, after kind of messing around, I came up with this little melody, and I was like, this is kind of cool. And then that inspired these other parts, and blah blah blah. And then I was like, oh wait, I should just try recording it. And then I recorded it after working on this thing for about 40 minutes or so. And then I listened to it. That's one of the other things about this really awesome speaker here, this Bluetooth speaker, because I've gotten in the habit of recording any and all ideas that I have, when it comes to writing, and I record everything that comes to mind or that comes up through jamming, through just kind of improvising or whatever happens, and I can play it through the speaker, and the sound is usually really good, and it's a really good indicator of if it's like coming together, or if it's gelling, or if it's vibing. And which you hear, and this is a thing too, you hear very often said by a lot of film composers or just writers in general, is you end up throwing out more ideas than you save, and that's what ends up happening, because that more than when I do find something that's working, there's tons of ideas that I do record on my phone. Then I listen to it on the speaker, and I'm like, no, that's not very, very good. So then I kind of either I'll save it, put it on the back burner, or I'll just delete it. So that happens. That's pretty commonplace. Or I'll try, maybe it's a tune that I um, have had for a while, and I'll try something new, like a new part or adding a part. Because sometimes I do that quite a bit with our tunes, even songs that we've had for a very long time. I will sometimes tweak them or change a patch, change a sound. The structure and the melody and the lyrics, all that kind of stuff will always be set. But for older tunes, sometimes I will like try to give them a little bit of a fresh thing or change them up a little bit. And recording and listening back to stuff is the best thing, because you can really gauge it, and then you're like, oh, okay, there's something here that's cool, or it's got some potential, or no, I don't. That wasn't very good. That's not really, it's not really landing anywhere. So it's such a great thing. And then I'm in the habit too of, after if I record something, either it's like, from the process of like working on it for a long time, or it comes up quick, like this tune did, and I'll record it. And if the recording sounds pretty good, like the quality is pretty good, I'm in the habit too. Like, I have a few friends, a little group of friends that I have that are also, kind of musicians or in the arts, and I'll send out, I'll send them those tracks. I'll send them the recordings, and I do that just because I like hearing feedback. I like hearing feedback to see if, like, maybe it's not working, maybe it's not really gelling, or maybe it is gelling and there is something there. So I love that, because it's very easy to kind of get lost in my own stupid head and lose, like, kind of the reality of some, to be objective anymore. It can be really hard when you're in your little space, your own space, for a long time. So I do that a lot, and it's usually really helpful when I do that, the whole process, because I can be pretty objective about whether something's kind of working or gelling, and also if something is not. So it's really cool. So I wrote this tune the other night after watching a Substance, and it came out quickly, and I was just like, what the hell? Because usually for me, when I'm writing a song, it takes me forever. I've always been kind of envious and kind of jealous of, like, people that I know that are really great songwriters, and they will just, like, crank out songs after another, and one after another, and they'll do it sometimes in a really, really quick period. The process is always different, but for people who are, more, you know, singer songwriter, driven artists in that more traditional sense, they will usually, it's, I think in some ways it's easier for them to crank out songs. And a lot of the times too, what I find is that people who are good singer songwriters are, they have a pretty good grasp of music theory. Like, they know what they're playing technically. Like, they know the chords, they know the melody, they know what key everything is in from a technical side. Meaning their ear training, they have some degree of ear training or harmony. They have pretty good, like, piano skills, and pretty decent music theory skills, which is really good. And so I think that makes the process a little bit quicker and easier. But for me, I don't really have any of that. I do everything by ear, so it takes a really, really long time to come up with stuff. But you just you figure out what works best. Occasionally things like that happen. Situations like this happens where something will come up, an idea, or for a tune or what have you, will come up pretty quick. But generally, it's pretty, it's pretty slow going. And I try to allow myself to have a lot of patience around the process because, if I'm coming up with a melody, and usually, like, if I'm coming up with a melody when it comes to quantum, it's all based on my keyboard, which obviously piano is a very melodic based instrument. That's usually where I start for the most part. And but I don't really know like the chords I'm playing or even the notes I'm playing, or I will like come up with like maybe a sound, a little melodic run or something that like resonates with me. You're like, oh, I like that sound. I like the way that sounds cool. Or that's a cool like combination of notes or whatever. And then I will usually from there I will go by just my ear. I'll just find other things that seem to harmonically work, or kind of maybe tell the story. And that's usually what I do. And I'll usually focus on that, and then everything else will come after. So it's a longer process. But the other night I was kind of like, whoa, okay, this is crazy. And then I recorded it, and then I worked on it, and then realized, wow, I think I have a fully realized song. And it was totally inspired by Communion, and it was cool because I sent out the track to another friend, and the first thing that they said was, "Wow, this tune has a sounds like a soundtrack. It has very much a soundtrack vibe." And I was like, "Oh, that's awesome!" Like I took that as a really nice compliment because that's what it was really inspired by, and that's mainly what the weird music I write is inspired by. So very very cool. And I did a review for Communion the other day. I think it was. It's been up for a day or two. And again, this is like this is such a whacked movie. It is. It's really. It's kind of a terrible movie in a lot of ways. Like some of the acting is absolutely atrocious, and the dialogue is so bad, and it's such a weird. I mean, the movie itself or the story itself is just kind of bonkers crazy, and it is definitely a case of where there's a lot of unusual things about this, and the main thing I'm going to be talking about is the soundtrack, which isn't really unusual, but really, really surprising. And I absolutely love the soundtrack for this movie. It's absolutely incredible. Um, and again, Communion is such a weird movie because it is, if you, I guess the best way to say it, and I did talk about the movie itself, not to go on too much about the movie per se in this video, but if you're a Christopher Walken fan and you want to see a movie where Christopher Walken is goes all out, as Christopher Walken, Communion is probably the movie for you. Like he's literally just kind of he's playing himself, like literally his whole shtick, like the way he delivers his lines, his whole like mannerism and his like crazy kind of eccentric vibe that he's always been known for. His you know he had a background in dancing as well, so there's some aspects in this movie where he almost kind of incorporates that in this like really theatrical way, which is just so odd. And he's so Christopher Walken is playing Whitley Strieber, who the story is based on, and Whitley Strieber. I've seen lots of interviews with him, and I've read. Communion is one of my favorite books, but he's a very like kind of mild mannered, very subdued kind of guy. The story that he tells in Communion, anybody out there who hasn't read Communion, I highly recommend it. I think if you like books about alien abductions, it's I think it's the best one out there. It's fucking terrifying. It's a really good book. But Whitley Strieber's kind of mannerisms, like I've seen him interviewed a lot, and even how he comes across in the story, like just how he is as a person, he seems like a pretty quiet, subdued guy, a very mellow guy, and he's like keeps to himself, does his job, and just lives his life. The story that he tells of his supposed abduction from aliens is completely insane. But his whole like mannerism thing is very very mellow and subdued. But Christopher Walken is so fucking animated and just so like wild and over the top in this movie that it's like he literally is playing Christopher Walken. So it's hilarious. The movie is so terrible too. It's like the other thing that's so strange about this movie is that it was produced by Whitley Strieber. Um, he put his own money into this movie to get it made. It came out in 1989, and he also wrote the screenplay, which is so bizarre. He adapted the book, into a movie screenplay for the movie. And I'm like, man, he is clearly not talented at. I mean, he might be a really fantastic writer, but he's clearly not a really good screenplay writer because writing a screenplay is fucking hard, and it's a totally different medium, or of way. It's a totally different way of telling a story. It's a very different kind of a science. It's very hard, and so screenplay is not very good, and the acting is so wooden and kind of terrible in this movie. But I really do think that the case that the reason I actually really love this movie is because it's the case. I think it's like kind of a B movie, kind of a low budget exploitation movie. Even though this came out in '89, which is like a little bit past that period, I consider that I consider it to be kind of that part of that world. Especially too, which is surprising, is that I think it's the case of it's so bad it's good. Like it's a terrible movie, but it's so terrible that it is kind of awesome. And Christopher Walken is just Christopher Walken on steroids in this movie. He's so fucking over the top. Um, the other thing that's really funny about this movie and surprising is the budget. This movie is so low budget as well, which again brings me back to while as to why I would include it into kind of the low budget exploitation world, and all those things. It's totally tied to it. But this the other but again, I do think it's the case of it's so bad it's good. And so I watched this. I had seen this movie a handful of times as a kid. Then it fell into total obscurity. And then Santa Claus, out of nowhere, got this movie for me. And I was just like, holy shit, what a surprise. Because I had told Santa Claus that it had come up a few times over conversations where I've always Santa Claus knows I've always been really into I've always been fascinated with the UFO phenomenon. I've always been interested in it, and I've always Communion has always been one of my favorite books. I've read that book numerous times. I just read it again last year, and it's definitely on my top five list of favorite books. So, and then I just remember telling Santa Claus, yeah, like one point they made a movie with Christopher Walken, and it's just like it's totally whacked and crazy and weird, and but it's like really hard to find. And then lo and behold, I ended up getting it on Blu-ray, which is crazy. So then I watched it the other night, and the other thing that I was taken aback by, the thing that I just think is really, really awesome about this movie is the soundtrack. The soundtrack for this movie is kind of amazing. And so after doing a show on Raffi, the composer for The Substance, which I just think is absolutely incredible, I was like, you know what, I think I'm going to do a show where I'm going to mainly talk about soundtrack stuff, but then the soundtrack for for this movie, Communion, because I think it's really incredible. And the other thing that's kind of mind-boggling, I mean, this movie came out in 1989, and this music was composed primarily by the famous British blues guitar player Eric Clapton. I didn't know that until I watched this movie, and I was just like, "What?" Like, that's such a weird um, thing to me. I just think it's such a weird thing because, I mean, the soundtrack is very ambient based. It's basically just him playing guitar, and there's a lot of synths in it, and it's really beautiful. It's really haunting. It's kind of sad, and it's also beautiful. Really beautiful melodies going on in the soundtrack itself, especially like kind of the main title. It's really really awesome, and it's like legitimately, other than Christopher Walken's completely over the top performance in this movie, the soundtrack is the one thing in it the one thing in this movie that I think is seriously really good, like high level. It's killer, and I've looked it up, and I was blown away. Like, what? Eric Clapton did the soundtrack for this movie? Like, that's so whacked. He also did a collaboration. So yeah, Eric Clapton primarily wrote the music and performed the music on here, but he also collaborated with Australian composer Alan Zavid uh, as well. And which he provides the kind of the keyboard or ambient quality along with Eric Clapton's guitar work, and it's all instrumental. It's really beautiful stuff, and there's no. I looked into it, and there's no. I mean, because this movie, Communion, is a pretty obscure movie. I never hear anybody talk about this movie, and it's as shitty as it is. It's kind of fucking awesome. And Christopher Walken is a huge iconic actor. Everybody knows Christopher Walken. Everybody loves Christopher Walken. I mean, how can you not? I'm kind of surprised that people haven't seen this movie. I don't know anybody who's seen this movie. Every now and then it comes up, where I'll talk to a friend or whatever about the book and the movie, and I've never met anybody over time or whatnot that has read the book and definitely has not seen the movie. So, and I had to like Santa Claus had to jump through some hurdles to get this movie on Blu-ray because it was from a this really kind of obscure company in Italy that put it out on DVD. There's no special features on here. It's just straight up. It's an Italian menu. I was worried that I couldn't even that I could. I was worried that if it would be able to play or not on my player because it's an Italian movie or an Italian version. Luckily, it's in English, so but it has no special features, nothing. But really awesome. I was just like, yeah, I'm totally into it. And I looked into the movie like as far as the soundtrack goes, and there's no soundtrack, physical media version of this movie for the soundtrack available anywhere. There's no vinyl pressing of it. There's nothing. You can watch it or listen to it, I guess, on YouTube, but it's included within the movie. You can't listen to. There's no access to the soundtrack without the movie, which is kind of wild. And I think it's because of how like forgotten this movie is or how obscure this movie is, because it's really obscure. And the thing that I was so really surprised by and kind of shocked was that Eric Clapton, did the film score, because I don't believe um, Eric Clapton has ever done any compositions for movies or soundtrack work ever before, and I'm not aware of him doing any kind of work like this because this is like totally different than anything he's known for throughout the years. He's an iconic blues guitar player. I like Eric Clapton. I mean, I like the early stuff that he did with Cream. That stuff's badass. Like that, I love that stuff a lot. His solo stuff, I don't know. I've never been a big fan. I mean, he's an amazing guitar player, but he's had a long, uh, incredibly successful career. I mean, probably uh, one of the most well-known guitar players in the entire world. He's like Eric Clapton is literally a household name. But I always think of Eric Clapton. I mean, when he started off with like Cream and like the early stuff that he was doing even before, his playing was like really raw and kind of nasty, especially playing with Ginger Baker. And I love that stuff a lot. I have a couple of those early albums. And then everything else that he's done after that, like he went on to, to have a massively successful solo career. Obviously, I mean, many solo records, and he became a commercial, mega pop star. And he was strictly a guitar player for many years, and then he really became this big pop star. But a lot of his music, you know, is really kind of straight laced, kind of, you know, white bread kind of music. It's very, it's very straight. It's very, predictable, very simple. It's, it's okay. Um, but I don't like his playing in the more recent times compared to like I liked him when he was a little bit more of a raw, had a little bit more of a raw, like aggressive kind of sound, and got less caught up in the whole kind of pop celebrity thing. Wonderful Tonight, like, he had so many hits too, so many big hits for over the years. But you know, um, but overall, a very straight laced kind of pop star, and guitar player. So when I found out that he's like doing the soundtrack for this really weird movie that's totally obscure, I was just like, what? And again, you can watch the. I guess there are clips, and you can listen to the soundtrack technically on YouTube, but it's going to be, I think, clips from the movie included. So um, I don't know of anywhere where you can get the actual soundtrack or listen to it, because you can, for the most part. Like, I was listening to The Substance the other day on YouTube. I don't own it, but I was able to listen to the whole soundtrack by itself on YouTube, and it was amazing. But you can do that with most film scores and soundtracks, and then you can also buy them, on physical media, especially on vinyl. Vinyl has become a huge thing for soundtracks, which is really awesome. But you can't do that with this soundtrack. But the best aspect, I do think, as far as the best aspect of Communion, is the music. I really do. And Christopher Walken's just outrageous, insane performance. It's great. And you know, the other thing that's so weird about this movie is that it really doesn't resemble the book at all. Like, I've read the book quite a few times, and there's so much stuff in the book that they like, or when they went to adapt the story for the movie, for the big screen, they really like they made it overly dramatic, and which they didn't need to, because the story itself is just completely bonkers. Um, and they changed a lot of things around. And his portrayal, Christopher Walken's portrayal of Whitley Strieber, it like doesn't resemble Whitley Strieber at all. Like, it's Christopher Walken playing Christopher Walken. But the soundtrack is really good. It's awesome and really cool and inspiring. I think, and it's weird. It's obscure. It's very unknown. But I kind of feel like the music that Eric Clapton did for this film is probably the best music that he's done since Cream, or his early British years. Yeah, I think it's better than anything he's ever done outside of those periods. So yeah, check out the soundtrack for Communion by Eric Clapton. Just super wild, and also Alan Zavid. Yeah, go figure. Good stuff. All right, peace. Enjoy the snow.